Welcome in, everyone, to the Week 7 edition of my Fantasy Football Favorites and Fades here on fantasyfootballforthepeople.com. If you haven't already, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and like and share the video. It helps me out a lot here in my first year on YouTube. Before we get started with this week's Favorites and Fades, I always want to be transparent and go back real quick through last week's Favorites and Fades, see how many were hits, see how many were misses, and see what we learned from what happened last week. And last week was a doozy, to say the least. Went a little over 50-50 on the hits and misses, so we're going to run through those real fast here. Starting off with the favorites, quarterback Matthew Stafford finishes the QB 15 in a bad scoring week for quarterbacks, so it's even worse than what he finished at. So for me, just disappointing. Stafford just hasn't thrown multiple touchdowns in many games this year. I think it's only been one. After I looked back at everything, I do think that better days are ahead, especially as this offense needs to look to throw more without Kyron Williams for the next few weeks. But he's just really hard to trust at the moment for fantasy purposes, not scoring enough. Moving on to running back Alvin Kamara, he finished as the RB12. That was a massive hit. Kamara didn't score, and he continued to have efficiency problems on the ground, like I kind of figured that he would. But he got 26 touches, and with 8 of them being receptions, there was no way that he was going to have a bad fantasy week. He hasn't even hit his ceiling. Once he can start finding the end zone, he's only going to get better. Interested to see what his workload is going to be like once Jamal Williams is back, though, which he is going to be back this week. By the time that you see this video, he will have already played on Thursday night, so I'm very interested to see how that goes. Next, running back James Cook, RB31, another miss. Pretty much every single bill in that game last week was an absolute disappointment outside of Stephon Diggs. Cooks was cooking, no pun intended. 5.1 yards per carry, just still didn't score a touchdown, and he had his first game with 0 targets on the entire season. Mismanagement, in my opinion. I think they need to be using him more. He is one of their best players in terms of yards gained per touch, and he's just not getting. Wide receiver Adam Thielen, wide receiver 4, he's a hit no matter what, because he's been the wide receiver 2 since week 2. There's no sitting Adam Thielen anymore. You don't need to think about it. He is an auto start every single week. It does not matter the matchup. Then we got the Minnesota duo of Jordan Addison and KJ Osborne. Addison finishes the wide receiver 30. I'm going to consider him a hit. And then Osborne finishes the wide receiver 47. That was a miss. Addison may not have went nuclear, like I kind of hoped that he would, stepping up as the whole one in replacement of JJ. But he was still a much better start than many other rotating backs from last week. And there was a lot of wide receiver scoring last week. So I'm confident that he's going to improve. Osborne, he saw plenty of run in terms of routes, and he's going to continue to see targets at a high rate, just not as exciting or as explosive as Addison. So he's more of a, you play him when he has a good matchup and hope that he finds the end zone, than Addison, who I think could be started pretty much any week. And then Logan Thomas, huge miss. He was a tight end 50. I mean, I'll own up to this one as a miss, obviously, but in my defense, the whole industry loved Thomas last week. I really understand how you give a guy who was an integral piece of your offense through the first 5 games of your just one target in a matchup that could have easily been exploited against that defense, who is bottom of the barrel against tight ends all year so far. Man, when you have any tight end that's outside the top 6 consensus tight ends, it's just a cruel reminder that you're playing roulette every single week. It is Russian roulette, and you can follow all the stats that you want. You can follow all the trends, the target trends, like we did with Logan Thomas, and it could still end up being a dud like it was last week. So just an unfortunate reminder of that fact. Moving on to the fades real quick. Derek Carr, he was a QB 10. That was a miss on my part. Shouldn't be on this list, but the QB scoring was so bad last week that he on the top 10 with just 1 touchdown pass completed. I mean, it was a bad call on my part. I'll admit it. I didn't expect 50 pass attempts, but he did not look good. He did not look good. Running back Jerome Ford, another miss. He finishes the RB22. This one looked like a great call until about the very end of that game, when the Cleveland Browns were in clock killing mode in that upset win over San Francisco. To be frank with you, Kareem Hunt looked like the better back, and I think that he is going to continue to increase his role, making Jerome Ford a bit riskier every single week as we go on here. RB22, yeah, it's a miss on my part, but it's not looking good for the future. Moving on to the Baltimore running backs. Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, and Keaton Mitchell. Hill was the RB40. Gus Edwards was the RB45. Keaton Mitchell, he didn't rank because he didn't get a snap. He was active, no snaps. This was just a bad matchup for these guys, and there was no way that they were going to produce. The one thing that we did learn, thankfully, was that Hill seems to have the most juice on this team, and they're going to trust the veteran backs over the rookie right now, especially with the way that they're playing and how that offense just is kind of stagnating. So if you got to play somebody, Justice Hill is a decent play to get the upside to hopefully finish as a flex. And then Gus Edwards, yeah, you can get the carries, but he's just not efficient. He does not look good. So if he doesn't find the end zone, you're going to have a really hard time having a nice week with him in your lineup. And then we're going to end off with 3 straight hits. DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver 82. He had an atrocious outing last week, and then it was capped off with Tannehill getting another ankle injury just like he suffered last year. Obviously, it's not as severe, but he's going to miss time. At this point, he's had 1 good game in 6 weeks. You just play him at your own risk. Joshua Palmer, he was the wide receiver 37, finished outside that top 36 like I figured, so that was a hit. I will admit he looked a lot better than I thought he would, or I should say he finished a lot higher than I thought he would. I had him in the 40s, but he still found a way to miss the top 36, and he did not win anybody their matchup on Monday night if you needed him to do that for you and gain a bunch of double-digit points. I will say, though, still much rather have him than Quentin Johnston. And then Tyler Higbee, tight end 29, that was a hit. Since the return of Cooper Kupp, Higbee has 4 total receptions on 6 targets for 38 yards. This offense runs through Kupp and Nakua, and then Tutu is the clear 3. So when you're making Tyler Higbee the number 4 in this offense, very hard to trust, especially when I think they threw 24 total passes last week in a game that was pretty handled by the Rams. So if they're going to handle it, there's almost no way that he's going to be able to score. And it was against Arizona, so just not going to work out. But hits, 6 misses compared to last week. That's a big improvement because last week was just an absolute dumpster fire. But before diving into this week's list, I want to let everyone know that I'm going to be using adjusted strength of schedule when I'm talking about matchups moving forward. And essentially, strength or schedule adjusted rankings take into account each weekly opponent to compare if the defense gives up more or less fantasy points than the opponent averages. So as the season continues to go on, and this is why I'm using this now at kind of like the midpoint of the year, these metrics get much stronger, give us a more accurate understanding of how teams match up against each other for fantasy. So it's essentially the more accurate strength of schedule rankings than actually just looking at, well, this team gives up the 20th most points to tight end position. Well, over the past 4 weeks, they've actually given up the 29th most fantasy points. So it's an easier way to indicate what's going on. So we're going to start off with my first favorite of the week, quarterback Brock Purdy going up against Minnesota on Monday Night Football. Yes, Purdy finally imploded last Sunday against the stellar Cleveland defense. Both CMC and Deebo Samuel could not finish the game. They may not play again on Monday, and people are going to panic and think that Purdy's not going to be able to get things done. However, I'm not out on him. Not at all. Cleveland has arguably the best defense in the league by a long shot, and this team is going to find a way to adjust. It's too good of an offense. It's too talented of a head coaching staff, and it's too talented of a team overall to just crumble under a bad loss the week after. The Vikings are middle of the pack against quarterbacks when you adjust for schedule. But they had an easy out last week against Chicago, who lost Justin Fields in the middle of the game and then had to play against the rookie Badgett. So those numbers are a little bit fudged up. Purdy has ranked top 12 in 3 of 6 games so far this season, and he's got 3 games with multi-touchdowns thrown. This is a bounce back week for Purdy, in my opinion. And honestly, if CMC misses, I think that means that we're going to see the 49ers lean a little bit more on the passing game, the short passing game, more George Kittle, for example, to be involved. And I think that's going to supplement things and go well for Purdy in his favor. So if you have Purdy, he most likely was dropped in a lot of leagues. I think you can pick him up and stream him this week in a really nice matchup against Minnesota's defense. Let's move on to the running back position. We got Aaron Jones going to Denver to play the Broncos. Burns are real with Aaron Jones, okay? I saw it all over my Twitter feed after he was a favorite 2 weeks ago and then became a surprise inactive leading up to the game. However, the Packers desperately need the veteran running back to fill in and come back and make this offense a more balanced attack moving forward. Jordan Love has really struggled with turnover problems. He's really struggled with accuracy issues, completing passes, downfield. That's made this offense completely stagnant and unable to move the ball, much different than we saw for the first month of the season. The matchup against Denver is the perfect bounce back matchup for any running back. The Broncos allow the most fantasy points to running backs even after you adjust for schedule. So this isn't just because they played Miami and they let up 70 points. They're letting up the most fantasy points to running backs no matter what at this point. So would love turning the ball over as often as he has of late. They need to lean on Jones and the run game should be strong in this matchup. He has true top 12 upside this week, and he needs to be in all lineups moving into week 7. Let's go to a little bit of a risky one here. Zack Evans versus Pittsburgh. The Rams situation at a running back is scary. There's no doubt about that. But to me, if there's one running back that I'm going to bet on, it is the running back who was next up on the depth chart and was not just a practice squad addition or a practice squad call up like Royce Freeman is, or in addition to the practice squad like Darrell Henderson, or a guy off the street that was signed in Myles Gaskin. I think they're going to stick to Evans and let him have the shot to show them what he's got. And for passing downs, if they don't trust him in pass protection, that'll go to Royce Freeman. So it'll cap his upside a little bit. But Kyren Williams wasn't getting very many targets since the return of Cooper Kupp. So this is more of a rushing volume play in a good matchup against Pittsburgh than it is I think he's going to get a bunch of targets on top of the rushing work that he should normally get. I'm not betting on that for this week, which is why he's a back end RB2 for me. But still, in a week with 6 buys, I think he's someone that should be in most lineups, especially if you're struggling at running back. I have him in some lineups in my leagues. So Evans overall, super talented prospect. He has some serious bursts in the collegiate ranks, just fell in the draft for whatever reason. McVay has already turned one running back that absolutely nobody was drafting in August into an absolute superstar for fantasy purposes in Kyren Williams. So he can do that again. I have faith that he is able to take these guys and make them into producers for fantasy football. Pittsburgh is also a phenomenal matchup. Steelers allow the 10th most fantasy points per game to running backs after you adjust for schedule. So this is the perfect chance for Evans to capitalize on his opportunity and show what he's got. I think he's a back-end RB2 in week 7, and I think he should be in lineups over a lot of other guys that you might be thinking should start over him. On to Marquise Brown at Seattle. Brown quietly is ranked as the wide receiver 16 overall this season and has been a top 20 wide receiver in 3 of his 6 games. He has at least 10 targets in 4 games, and last week he saw a season-high 11 targets against the Rams in a losing effort. He is the clear top option for Joshua Dobbs, and he has a chance to smash this week against Seattle. The Seahawks allow the 11th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers after adjusting for schedule and have the ability to score often on the Cardinals' defense. So they're going to be able to make this a competitive game. It should be pretty back and forth. I don't expect the Cardinals to get blown out this week like they did last week against the Rams. I think that you need to fire him up. I know last week, the reason I'm saying this is last week was a bad week for Marquise Brown. It was one of his worst fantasy producing weeks on the season. So people might be afraid and move away from him. Maybe think the offense is starting to fall apart. I don't believe that. I think you fire him up. He has top 12 upside this week if he can find the end zone, and he's already found it 4 times this year. So keep him in your lineups. We're going to move on to Curtis Samuel. And I picked Curtis Samuel because I want to go a little bit deeper this week into like that top 30-ish range, only for the sole fact that there's 6 teams on bye and there's a ton of injuries. So there are going to be people starting guys like Curtis Samuel in flex spots, and that I want to give you the confidence to start someone like Samuel. He's been everything we wanted Jahan Dotson to be this season. He's the wide receiver 26 overall. He's caught 87.1% of his targets, and he's the highest scoring fantasy wide receiver out of Washington this year. So He has double-digit fantasy points in 3 straight weeks, and he has a chance to smash against the New York Giants. The Giants, they're middle of the pack after adjusting for schedule against wide receivers, but it's Samuel's guaranteed target share that makes me confident that he'll find a way to finish inside that top 36 again this week. I think he has top 20 upside if he can find his way into the end zone. And I'm not worried about the Washington offense going up against the Giants defense after the Bills game last week. That was more of an anomaly than anything else. I think the Commanders are going to find a way to put up points against the Giants. Start him if you got him. Moving on to the fades of the week. First fade, Kirk Cousins at San Francisco. We learned that Kirk Cousins may actually need Justin Jefferson to have some good fantasy outings. He failed to reach double-digit fantasy points last week against the hapless Chicago Bears defense, and now he has to face an angry 49ers defense in prime time without his star receiver. Even in a week with 6 teams on bye, I would highly suggest looking for a better option. San Francisco allows the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks when adjusting for schedule. And Cousins always struggles under the bright lights, guys. He's always been a quarterback that just does not play well in prime time. Here are a list of quarterbacks that I would go get off the wire if you can to play over him. Sam Howell, Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, Jordan Love, and I even have Joshua Dobbs of Arizona ranked 1 spot higher than Cousins this week. I would bench Cousins in favor of any of those guys if you can. Go find another option if possible for this week. Going to the running back position, we got Najee Harris going to LA to play the Rams. I know 6 teams are on bye this week. You've got Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, Joe Mixon, Miles Sanders, and Chuba Hubbard of Carolina, Tony Pollard, and Dameon Pierce all on a bye week. Even then, I would still see if I could find a way to sit Najee this week. The last time that we saw the Steelers offense play before their bye week, Harris had 14 carries for 37 yards, played 56% of the team's snaps. Teammate Jalen Warren took 9 carries for 40 yards and caught 3 passes for 39 yards on 48% of the snaps. So the backfield has turned into a near 50-50 split, and Warren is just playing better. He's been playing better all season. He looks like the more explosive option of the two, and that shift to Warren being the main guy, I think is going to happen sooner rather than later. Los Angeles allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game when adjusting for schedule to the running back position, so they're going to find a way to shut down Harris, who's already struggling. But there are waiver players like Zack Evans that I would play personally over top of Najee Harris. If you have the ability to pivot to someone else, I would do it this week. Running back, Rachaad White versus Atlanta. I hate to pick on Rachaad White because I know that he has made this list before in the past, maybe twice even. But his past 3 matchups have been absolutely brutal. He has not been good for fantasy, and he's got another terrible one this week against the Falcons. White has just 2 top 24 finishes on the season when playing against run defenses that are ranked inside the top 10, and he is averaging just 3 yards per carry against those defenses. The Falcons allow the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs when adjusting for schedule, and they're going to need to throw often to keep pace with this Lions offense. This is not a game where you're going to see 25 carries for Rachaad White. It's just not going to be that week, most likely. Even with all the players on bye, I understand that if you can't sit White, then you play him. Just make sure that you manage your expectations. This is probably going to be another disappointing outing if we're following the trends correctly. When he plays a really good run defense, he's just not efficient enough to have a good fantasy week. So be careful there. Going to the wide receiver position, we got wide receivers Michael Pittman and Joshua Downs of the Indianapolis Colts going up against the Cleveland Browns this week. Both Pittman and Downs have been great options, especially in PPR. With Gardner Minshew under center, it is the Michael Pittman and Josh Downs show. No one else really gets a high target share. Those two are able to hit double digits almost in the same week. It's a very possible thing that can happen with both of those guys with Minshew under center. However, this week I'm looking to find a way to sit them against the Cleveland Browns. The Browns defense is fantastic, and while Pittman and Downs are seeing a ton of targets, Minshew really isn't playing well at quarterback for the Colts. He's turning the ball over at a high rate, and he's going to have a serious issue going up against this Browns defense. Cleveland allows the fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers after adjusting for schedule, and that's going to absolutely cap their ceilings. I doubt either of them find their way into the end zone this week. Pittman is playable, a very low end wide receiver 3, in my opinion, this week. But I think you just need to make sure that you adjust your expectations if you play him. And as for Downs, I would find a way to bench him completely. You should be able to find another option than Downs this week off of the waiver wire. Let's go to wide receiver Courtland Sutton versus Green Bay. The hot mess that is the Denver offense is likely holding a fire sale over the next couple weeks. I know they keep saying that they're not to the media, but you can sense that there's a lot of changes coming with that offense, and they're going to want to get the draft capital to make some changes next year with head coach Sean Payton. But Sutton has been the clear top option for Denver, and he's been a decent fantasy asset over the past 6 weeks. The problem is the matchup this week against the Packers. Packers allow the 13th fewest fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position when adjusting for schedule, and they've just allowed 4 touchdowns all season. Sutton's got 4 touchdowns on the year, but he's only finished as a top 24 wide receiver twice. So now, basically, the moral of the story here is unless he scores, you're not going to be happy. And even if he does score, you still might not be happy because he's found a way to find the end zone and still finish outside the top 24 so far this season 2 times. So obviously you're sitting Jerry Jeudy, you're sitting Marvin Mims and the rest of the pass catchers. But I know on a week with 6 teams on bye, people are going to look at Courtland Sutton and try to find a way to put him in their lineup. I say find a way to get him out of it. There are other options I would rather start this week. And then finally, we've got tight end Hunter Henry going up against Buffalo. Henry is the tight end 13 overall on the season, and he had a really, really good opening to the year. However, the past few weeks have just been absolutely brutal for not just Hunter Henry, but the Patriots offense as the whole. He's got just 1 catch with 5 targets over the past 2 weeks. Now he's also dealing with an ankle injury. He's most likely going to play through it at this point. He is practicing on a limited basis, but he's facing a Bills defense that allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game after adjusting for schedule to the tight end position. So this offense isn't finding the end zone enough to make him a good start in matchups that are really bad. So you've got to find a way to get Henry out of your lineups. I know people have been riding him since those first 2 weeks. This is the week to pivot off of him and find a better streaming option if you can. And guys, that is going to do it for my week 7 favorites and fades here on Fantasy Football for the People. As always, please like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out a ton. If you have any questions, go to my Twitter account at FTP, and you can go into the DMs. You can ask them through a tweet. It doesn't matter to me. Whatever questions you got, lineup questions, check out my TikTok throughout the week on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I take this video, cut it up, and make smaller videos of each individual player and run them through those days. I also do them in YouTube Shorts, and I do them on my Facebook page as well. So thank you guys for watching the video. If you have any questions, let me know. Good luck this week, and I will see you next time.